some of the key terms, again, the very word business analysis, the very phrase, whether you call it as a word or a phrase, business analysis is basically, again, we are starting from the very high level, and then we'll go in terms of the other terms and terminology that we need to be aware of in this context. So business analysis, as defined or as mentioned within the BA book by IIBA, it refers to the practice of aiding and creating change. So essentially, you are trying to support and you're trying to implement the processes, the practices, the procedures, policies, documentation, setting up the people, the teams, all of these to be able to support the implementation, to be able to support the organization in accepting change and in actually preparing and managing how you would implement these different aspects of an organizational setup to be able to manage the change. And that is done through the definition of needs, understanding the problems, the assumptions, the constraints, the pain areas, challenges, finding the opportunities, and from the external standpoint about identifying the threats and the risks, and then how we as an organization, as a team, as a product or an offering, how we can try and leverage the resources that we have internally to be able to address all of these factors, right? And then the end result, or rather the outcome, would be to obviously improve or increase the stakeholder value. So obviously one of the things is the shareholder perception, and shareholder equity is one aspect of the stakeholders, but that's just one aspect of it. But then we've got a lot of different types of stakeholders involved, not just a shareholder. So you've got a product development team, you've got quality assurance, we've got senior management, we've got support teams. These are all internal, whereas when we talk about external, we've got the marketing, the sales, the customers, users, suppliers, regulators, all of these, they're all part of the stakeholder aspect. So what we need to do is to obviously have this goal to optimize the value that each of these different stakeholders would derive from all the actions and the interactions that we do. So that pretty much is in a sense what business analysis is all about. So as I just mentioned, it could be a mix, a blend of different technologies, the techniques, the approaches, the methods, the principles, concepts that we use in order to deliver this value in a way that is more meaningful, more structured, and then that is actually trying to optimize the value. And in the process, you're trying to create these practices and principles and concepts so that you are prepared in a way to embrace change, and you're actually trying to manage the change in a better way. So that's the whole idea of why this whole construct of a business analysis has come through. So another term that we would need to understand is design. So when we talk about design, there is, as I mentioned, there is a problem space and the solution space. So design is what would bridge these two separate domains or spaces. So it's like a bridge that would be between one aspect and another aspect, between two banks. So a solution presented in a usable form, emphasizing understanding the value aided by the said solution. So basically what you're talking about is a representation of a solution. It's not the solution. It's not something that is actually in a form or a shape used by the end users directly, but design is a proxy solution, or something that looks like a solution, feels like a solution, and perhaps that is actually, if a little bit more value is added, tweaked, and that would actually become the solution. So it could be that's what we call as design. There are different format, shapes of design. So you have got user interface design, which is basically the colors, the fonts, the visual design, which is again the kind of presentation, how you would like to present it. There's a technical design, which is to do with the architecture, the components, the underlying technologies, the platforms that you would use. And then there is a human-computer interaction or design. Again, it's to do with that. There is physical design, how you would design the hardware and the infrastructure. So there are different definitions of the design, different flavors and variants of design. But in a sense, everything actually is a representation of your end solution in a way that you can try and start getting some feedback from the end users. And then you can try and build on the top of the design to make it better and to make it more presentable. And as it says, it is often presented as a document. There are a lot of documents, there are prototypes, there's POCs, there's wireframes, and then you've got things like, for example, the moving aspects of some of these dynamic prototypes, which involve even the navigation, the interaction. So all of these, and some don't have that, they're just static screens like wireframes. Some have got sketches, mind maps, all of these, even a paper. You can draw something on the paper, and that's called a paper prototype. We can use to elicit some of the feedback from the users. So all of these are different ways that you could potentially document the design. And then obviously there are other so-called documents when we talk about design: the high-level design, low-level design, architecture, and then some of the data models, again, the representation of the design of the data. So all of these, all of these come into the gamut of what we call as design. And then that's where we were talking about potentially the wireframes, prototypes. They form the aspect of the functionality, as well as some of the interaction, the navigation. All of that could be part of the prototyping. And then when it comes to the information architecture, that actually represents which element should be presented where. So the layout, designing the layout of the page, of the screen, how that should look like, how that should feel like, what should be the menu on the top, where should be the buttons, what should the links, the action buttons, all of that. And how should the home page be presented? How should the inner pages be driven from there? All of these are defined as part of the information architecture. And then, of course, once we have these design elements, then we can have the development started that would feed into the development. So the developers would need that kind of support from the BAs and the designers, so that they can understand what they're trying to develop, how that should look, what should be the structure of it, what should be the layout, and how that whole navigation should be, what should come first when you click on that, what page should be shown. All of these, if you try and give that and mention this clearly in the design, then that is going to give them a good understanding of how their solution that they're going to develop would need to be in place. What kind of what are the attributes, and how it should be structured, how it should be designed, how it should be presented, how it should be navigated, what kind of interaction elements should be there. All of that should be made clear when we when we try and work on the design, and that should be the input into the programming. And then obviously the output of that would be the final solution that they would create. So it's very important that we need to have this design and in place. And then obviously we as BAs need to support the designers, the user experience designers, the visual designers, and the user interface designers, all of these, perhaps even the technical architect, and the technical lead, tech lead, all of these different roles, we should support them in creating these design artifacts, as what we call, so that they provide the right perspective about what the requirements clearly are, what are the expectations, what are the objectives, and then how the final solution should really look like and how it should behave. So all of these need to be laid out very clearly. So very, very powerful tool in the